it's obviously a very hardcore technology problem. It's also a two-sided problem, right? Because now you have a charger on one side and a battery on the other. And you also have two sets of stakeholders, right? You have charging station operators setting up charging stations on one end, and you also have automotive companies building vehicles on the other. And the in-between interaction needs to be coordinated. Else, you're not going to have the best performance. Right? So if I were to look at the shift, energy is no more an infrastructural problem, and it's no more a one-sided problem. It's now a two-sided problem, and it's also a tech-heavy problem, with key focus being on transactions, right? And who can transact really well, right? It's almost like how money, right, went from a hard cash to electronic payments, and you sort of needed someone like a Visa to manage those electronic payments. We see energy also going from dumb chemicals you just pour and burn to smart electrons, right? And you need someone to manage those transactions.
So I'll just quickly begin. Welcome to the Blue Circle. It's such a big privilege and pleasure to connect with everyone and our distinguished keynote speaker, who is handpicked because of the think input and the rich experience he brings in. Thank you also to our distinguished audience for joining us, most of whom are CEOs, CXOs, and senior leaders. Many of them are our members and are repeat visitors to our webinars. This is very encouraging and motivates us to provide even higher levels of dialogue through the online mode as well. For those of you who are new with us today, Blue Circle is the world's first networking app for business leaders that's built in India. We currently focus on socioeconomic insights, which ultimately determine the evolving complexion of the market. Along with our weekly webinar series and our digital publication, you will be happy to know that we have recently launched the first version of the Blue Circle app for leaders, somewhat like the sector-specific LinkedIn for senior leaders, a space to have meaningful conversations, connect with over 15,000 plus like-minded leaders from India and across the globe, house high-quality curated content, and access interested. Please join us. We'll share the. Now, without further ado, I'm pleased to introduce today's keynote speaker, Mr. Arun Vinayak, co-founder and CEO, Exponent Energy. He has spent 7 years at Ather Energy's founding as Ather Energy's founding partner and chief product officer, helping build India's first vertically integrated electric two-wheeler ecosystem. During his time at Ather, he gained a unique perspective of the challenges EV players in India face. He embarked on a journey to build something beyond the EV to e-two-wheeler space and co-founded Exponent Energy in 2020. As a technology company, Exponent aims to simplify energy for EVs by building a flexible energy stack. Under his leadership, the company has built a battery pack and charging station called ePack and ePump that together unlocks a 0 to 100% rapid charge within 15 minutes for commercial vehicles with any number of wheels. And for today's topic, Mr. Vinayak will be discussing rapid, a two-sided platform.
Thank you so much, Gautam, for the introduction and for having me here. It's wonderful to be here. Thank you all for joining. We'd love to talk about today how energy is changing as we go from the petroleum world to a fully electric world. It's not just the fact that, okay, we're going to go from petroleum to electric energy, and instead of an engine, we're going to have a motor. While that's the obvious change, everything around it changes, specifically on connectivity. And the last part that changes is around energy, right? And that's what we'll sort of focus on today. Let me share my screen. Perfect. Yeah. I think before we start, I think it's important to sort of summarize what's happened to the EV space. I think in the last 10 years, EVs have done the 0 to 1 shift. Right? I think 10 years ago, even around the time when we started Ather, we'd walk around and tell people, hey, EVs can be faster and better than petrol vehicles, and no one would believe us because it just sounded ridiculous. But now it's true. Now I think now everyone understands and it's a given. It's believable that EVs are faster, they're sexier, they've got more torque, they have no maintenance. So everything about the vehicle is better, right? But what's holding back mass adoption is everything around energy, right? So many questions around where do I charge? How do I charge? How long will it take? Will my battery last? Who's financing all of this, right? Everything around energy is complicated today. Once I get the energy to the batteries, everything after that is great, right? But everything before that is quite complicated, right? And that's what we're focusing on to simplify at Exponent, right? And before we start simplifying energy and trying to solve the problem, it's important to look at how energy is changing by itself, right? It's a new paradigm in energy. It's now a tech-heavy problem, and it's a two-sided problem. In the petroleum world, energy is all about upstream, right? It's all about the companies that discovered petroleum as resources, extracted it, refined it, distributed it, right? The transaction is fairly easy, right? Pouring those chemicals into anyone's petrol can, right? It's very easy. So it's fairly a one-sided problem. It's a fairly upstream problem. And the automotive industry and the energy industry have fairly operated in isolation. Now, all of this changes in the EV world, right? Upstream is no more a problem. There's energy all around us. The problem in some sense becomes, how do I take energy from the grid and transfer it to the vehicle very quickly, very safely, and very efficiently? And it's obviously a very hardcore technology problem. It's also a two-sided problem, right? Because now you have a charger on one side and a battery on the other. And you also have two sets of stakeholders, right? You have charging station operators setting up charging stations on one end, and you also have automotive companies building vehicles on the other. And the in-between interaction needs to be coordinated. Else you're not going to have the best performance. Right? So if I were to look at the shift, energy is no more an infrastructural problem, and it's no more a one-sided problem. It's now a two-sided problem, and it's also a tech-heavy problem, with key focus being on transactions, right? And who can transact really well, right? It's almost like how money, right, went from a hard cash to electronic payments, and you sort of needed someone like a Visa to manage those electronic payments. We see energy also going from dumb chemicals you just pour and burn to smart electrons, right? And you need someone to manage those transactions, right? And in some sense, that's the core focus of the problem statement for us at Exponent. But beyond this Exponent as well, for anyone looking at energy, I think it's very important to look at it as a two-sided problem. And just solving one side doesn't really do justice, right? If I look at the supply chain today and of energy, right? It starts from the grid to the charger, then to the battery, and to the motor, right? Obviously, the charging station operators control the left hand, and the OEM, the vehicle manufacturers, control the right, right? As I said, once you get energy to the batteries, everything after that is fantastic, right? There's enough energy flow. EVs drive really quickly, so that's not a problem. And on this end, there's obviously enough energy that's available on the grid for us to pull from. But it's everything in between that's broken. How do chargers and batteries interact? And the fact that they don't do a great job today leads to two specific issues, right? One is charge time, and the other is battery time. Right? Obviously, when chargers and batteries don't understand each other, you have to slow things down. You have to ensure that you take it safe, and you can only do 4 to 8 hours of charge times. Right? At the same time, because chargers don't understand batteries, a lot of degradation gets built up today while charging batteries. Right? Charging a battery is like rolling a stone up the hill. Right? It's really, you're increasing the potential energy of the battery. It's a highly stressful process, and 80% of battery degradation happens during charging and not while discharging. Right? Discharging, you're actually relaxing the cell, right? So it's very hard to actually damage a cell or the battery while discharging, right? So which is why we look at both battery life and charge time as this coupled problem, and it's all really comes down to how chargers and batteries work very well together and how we solve for both sides of the transaction. Why is this an important problem to solve, right? Because these two metrics of charge time and battery life have sort of created a lot of issues in the EV ecosystem, right? As I said, everything about the vehicle is great today, but everything about energy is holds back adoption, right? The fact that batteries don't have long life leads to a lot of unpredictability in financing, right? Which leads to really high interest rates. And on the other end, a vehicle manufacturer, because it takes so long to charge, has to sell you a vehicle with 2 to 3x battery than what you actually need. So it's not a 100-kilometer range. You now need a 200-kilometer or a 300-kilometer range vehicle, which makes the vehicle more expensive and bulky, because now you're stuck using larger and larger batteries. Put this two together, large batteries and really high interest rates, the cost of owning an EV, specifically around the battery, is very, very expensive. And then on the other end, slow charging also ensures that also prevents high energy throughput. Right? If I'm charging a vehicle in 3 to 4 hours, let's say, I can only theoretically sell energy to 6 vehicles on a given piece of land on a given day, right? Theoretically at best, right? And that's not enough energy to run a profitable business, right? So slow charging directly affects the profitability of charging network, and hence the rate of growth of this network. Today, most network setup are either a marketing vertical for a particular OEM. It's more to create some sense of assurance, or it's a government subsidized activity, right? There is zero charging stations out there today that actually make money sustainably, right? And in some sense, if you really want networks all across India, you need to solve for that one problem. And if you're in the charging business, you are in the business of selling energy, and more the energy, the better. So which means rapid charging, in some sense, is a key unlock needed. But the way the industry works today, in a very decoupled problem, which is around batteries being built separately and chargers being built separately, you end up having this larger issue of high cost of ownership and low flexibility. And overall, there's a drastic impact on the adoption for EVs. And this is sort of a negative flywheel, right? For end users, obviously, you're stuck with low flexibility and high cost. OEMs cannot really scale to multiple segments. For charging station operators, it's very low profitability, right? CPO versus charge point operators, for example, right? Now, all of this is okay for the top 10% of India. You know, the guys buying an Ather or a Nexon, the high chance this segment is parking at home, charging at home overnight. This segment has really good credit ratings. Affordability is really not an issue. They also don't need flexibility as much, because this segment is going between home, office, and back 80% of the time. Right? But that's really just 10% India. Right? What about the rest of India? The rest of India really parks on the roads, right? And cannot afford large batteries and needs public charging, right? And in some sense, we cannot cut, copy, paste an electrification plan that the rest of the world is using for India. It just doesn't work. And in some sense, that's why we also started Exponent, right? To solve for that problem. Today, energy is complicated, it's slow, it's expensive. We need to make it cheap. We need to make it simple. We need to make it fast, right? And to do that, you've got to solve for both sides. Specifically at Exponent, we focused on something called the e-pack and the e-pump. Put together, it unlocks 15-minute rapid charging for a full charge, so you can recharge like you refuel. And we also provide a 3,000 cycle warranty, right? And funnily enough, we do this on affordable lithium-ion cells, right? The question that I get most asked is, hey, isn't rapid charging been around for a while? What's new? That's actually true, right? Rapid charging has been around for almost 13 years, but it's never been scalable, right? It was always done on bulky and expensive tech like LTOs or supercapacitors. I think the first rapid charging bus was running around in Belgium, I think in 2010, right? It's great as a pilot project, but it never scales, right? And for the first time, what we've been able to do is take a regular cell, something like an LFP or an NMC, and rapid charge that in 15 minutes while guaranteeing 3,000 cycle warranty on LFPs, right? So that's for the first time making rapid charging affordable and scalable. You do not take a cost hit, you do not take a weight hit, and we believe that's the way forward to get all of India to go electric ASAP. Right? And I said it's really a two-sided problem. You have to focus on batteries and chargers and how they work together. It's not just the tech, but it also requires stitching together both sides of the equation, stitching together charging station operators and OEMs and how they interact as well, right? A lot of focus on cells of late, right? And a lot of claims that, hey, this cell can charge in 5 minutes or this cell can charge in 10 minutes, which is great. But all of this is at a lab, right? Now, when you actually take that cell from the lab and take it out there in the field, while the cell does not charge in 5 or 15 minutes anymore, right? The cell now takes almost 40 minutes to an hour to actually charge. because every other system around it is not really built for rapid charging. Maybe the software, maybe the charger, maybe the connectors, maybe the intelligence needed to dump crazy amount of energy that you're taking from the grid and dumping it on into the cells in very little time, right? If I were to look at cells as buckets, right? If I have a bucket and I'm slowly pouring water into it in let's say 4 hours, it's quite easy, right? You don't need advanced technology. But let's say I want to do it in 1 hour, it gets a little harder. But now say I want to do it in 15 minutes, right? I'm really opening up the tap wider and wider. The amount of water flow, the amount of chaos, the amount of ripples, and everything in the bucket obviously goes up, right? And if you want to do this safely and reliably, then obviously the sort of technology that you need, including thermals, right? It's really, really advanced. And it's not really dependent on the cell. It's dependent on just the sheer fact that you want to rapid charge something, right? At the end of the day, heat generated is I square R, right? So if I want to charge something in 2 hours, right, I'm going to pass something called 0.5 C, right? And if I want to charge something in 15 minutes, then I've got to do a rough charging of 4 C, right? Now that's basically 8 times the current, right? But it's actually 64 times more heat, right? So just to give you a small understanding of how it's not just about the cell, but it's about everything else that needs to be built. You also need the chargers that can give you the power actually needed to do rapid charging. Right? And on the other end, it's not just about building large chargers, right? And there's been a lot of PR pieces of late saying, hey, this is the world's fastest electric vehicle charger, offers a charge in 15 minutes. A lot of PR pieces around it. But in some sense, this is more of a marketing gimmick than reality. Because if you drive your vehicle up, it will still charge as fast as your battery allows it, right? A larger charger does not mean you have faster charging. A larger charger means it's just a more expensive charger, right? So the answer is not just doing one of those, right? You have to focus on cells. You've got to focus on thermal management. You've got to focus on everything in between, and more importantly, you've got to focus on the chargers as well, right? But it all starts by understanding what's happening inside a cell, and that's what we do quite well. You've got to understand how cells are behaving when you rapid charge them. And if you look at a cell, it's basically got a cathode and an anode. And when you charge, you have ions going from one side to the other. And the anode is sort of like a foam-like substance that's absorbing these ions and storing them. So the next time you discharge, it actually releases these ions, and that's how you get energy, right? Now, the faster you charge, obviously, there are more lithium ions, right? And it's sort of like a Bangalore traffic jam. They're all colliding with each other, and they're all trying to find space on the anode, right? And sometimes you don't get enough space. And what then happens is something called lithium plating. The lithium ions get tired of waiting, right? And then they deposit themselves on the surface of the anode. This is called lithium plating, and it's really bad for 3 reasons. A, you end up losing active lithium, which means you've lost active capacity. B, you've increased the internal resistance of the cell, which means more heat the next time you charge it or discharge it. And 3, you've lost active anode surface area, right? So if you say you cover a particular amount of anode, then you can't really use that the next time, right? So the overall anode surface comes down. So the probability of all of this happening goes up, and it's sort of a snowball effect, right? That's why fast charging is generally considered bad. And the worst case is once you have enough lithium ions building up, you have something called an internal short circuit, right? And that's when you actually have cells and batteries catching fire, right? That's something that we've been seeing a lot of late, right? So if you really want to do a great job, you really need to understand what's happening inside the cells. You need to change the way you manage the flow of ions, and it's not just about playing around with anodes or cathode. Well, that's one layer. You also need to start leveraging a lot more electronics and software to be able to do this. Everything in the world is getting smarter, right? Including energy. So you can't just depend on material science or thermals independently. You've got to start getting smarter around how you sense and how you create algorithms to manage energy. Right? And that's what we do. See, think, and act. That's the 3-step process that we follow. Starts by understanding what's happening inside a cell. So you need more advanced BMSs, more accurate BMSs. You need a lot of intelligence. It's very similar to what happens in, say, in cameras, right? So if you, this is a video of, just to give an example of how important software is in everything today, right? If you really look at the left, that's the raw footage coming out of a camera hardware, right? And what you see on the right is actually a lot of post-processing that happens, and the sort of the clearer image that you get to see. Right? BMSs are very similar. right? BMS is a sort of like the camera for the cells. So it's not just about building great hardware. You need a lot of algorithms to clean up all the noise, to see clearly. You also need to ensure that we're not brute forcing charging. So, for example, ensuring that you're only charging as much as the batteries can allow, the cells can allow, and of course, you got to ensure that all cells work in harmony. So that becomes a really hard act. And then you're working in India, so your ambience are 45, 50. So you got to build really interesting thermal management systems. As I said, the amount of heat is crazy when you have a charge. So these are all the things that we focus on, and we have something called a flexible energy stack under the hood to solve all of this, where we focus on a cell agnostic solution. It's scalable from 48 to 800 volts, and we rapid charge any capacity, any number of weeks. And, we have two products, something called the e-pack and the e-pump, one that goes inside the vehicle, the one that sits on the ground. And under the hood, obviously, BMS, connectors, intelligence that sort of power our technology. Right? Probably stop here. If there are any questions, we can sort of pick that up.
I think fabulous presentation. I'm sure a lot of eyeballs was just right there in the presentation. I'll move on to the questions quickly. The first one coming from Rakesh Malak. You've already kind of tackled it, but I'll just put it out there. Large amount of energy is delivered in a short period of time, which tends to create a lot of stress in the charging and the battery. How are you tackling this issue?
Right. Great question, Rakesh. Let's start on the battery side, right? There are two things that stress the battery cell. It's voltage and temperature, right? Voltage is basically everything I spoke about over here, which is around impedance management and the sort of Tetris animation. It's on our website. It's basically around managing impedance and ensuring that doesn't create a lot of damage. Surprisingly and counterintuitively, while temperature does age, the biggest killer for cells is actually voltage and impedance as against temperature. Temperature is important to manage as well, and that's the other stress factor that you just have to do really good thermal management. There's nothing around. There's no shortcut, right? Heat is heat. It needs extraction. There's nothing glamorous about the problem. It's just hardcore engineering. You've got to extract the heat, right? So that I hope that answers the question. The other one is around the charger side. There are a lot of things that we think through around, hey, where do we set up this charger to ensure there's not really too much of a stress on the grid? Secondly, version 2 of our solutions will also start having backend buffering. So when I look at the energy stack end to end from grid to cell, we also need to ensure that we build the right buffering system so that we don't stress the grid out unnecessarily.
True, very true. I'll move on to the next question by Kastub. He's asking, I want to ask about, are you able to tackle the range increase and swappable battery issues? He's saying, sorry for vaguely asking.
Yeah, you mean, sorry, I don't understand the question.
I think I'll move on. Kastub, if you could just rewrite this would be great. I'll come to the next one. Will development of rapid charge batteries kill the viability of CPO business model?
Actually, no, it's actually quite the opposite, right? As we talked about, the biggest bottleneck today in the charging station business is how much energy am I selling, and the bottleneck is how quickly am I charging something, right? If a vehicle comes up, right? Let's say the vehicle is a 10 kilowatt hour battery. Whether I charge it up in 15 minutes or charge it up in 4 hours, the number of units of energy I'm selling is roughly the same, right? So obviously, it's just sort of like a factory, right? You want more and more vehicles coming in and out to really make more business viability. So and so it's faster the charging, the cheaper the charging becomes, right? It's not just what you have to pay for Bestcom, but you've also got rental, you got infrastructure, you got to pay for everything. So faster charging is always cheaper, and faster charging also means a much more profitable business, exponentially, pun intended. Yeah.
Great, sounds good. Akshay asks, will charging electric cars ever be as fast as pumping petrol?
Well, we'd love to get to a place where we do 5-minute charging. We've done it in the lab. It's not commercially viable today, so we're not really talking about it. I think my Volkswagen Polo takes something like 8 minutes to refuel, but I also have to spend. That includes waiting for the guy to make payments, etc. Right? So we're not just thinking through charge time; we're thinking through everything. How easy is it to find a charging station? How quickly can you charge? Also, how quickly can you do payments, and how seamlessly can you do all of this? And of course, we want to keep getting better and better. But funnily, today I think filling CNG in Delhi takes an hour plus. So in some sense, maybe we're already doing better than that. Right?
Okay, definitely. I couldn't agree more. In fact, just to add here, I was coming back from the airport one day and this cab guy took me to a CNG airport and I was stuck there for the next half an hour just lying there. It's quite problematic. I completely agree with you.
Are you serious? Like, that's really unfair.
Yeah. So yeah, I'll move on to the next one by Karan Goyal. He's asking, what are the areas in EV ecosystem where startups can emerge?
Oh wow, that's a great question, right? I think when we started this talk, talking about, it's not just the fact that an engine is going to go away and a motor is going to come in. Everything around how vehicles will be owned and built changes, and that's the great thing about EVs. Of course, it's green and sustainable. I think that's very important. But for me, as an automotive enthusiast, I just love EV because it's just a better vehicle. It changes the rules of how you can design, build, manufacture, and sell and service vehicles. So every layer of that is going to change, right? You're going to see a lot of startups focusing on dealership models, right? When you had laptops and cell phones, suddenly you had brand agnostic distribution, right? So that's something that's happening. Brand agnostic servicing is already something that's coming up. Energy is a huge place. How EVs get financed itself is changing, right? Because now you have a lot more data, but you don't have a resale value. You don't have a second-hand market that someone like a large diesel company enjoys, right? So fundamentally, how do you then solve for financing? You need a far more data-based uh, financing approach, right? So as I said, every layer of the stack is changing. How vehicles are being sold is also is already changing. A lot of software, a lot of customization. That's a large part. There's going to be a huge accessory market to all of this. And I think every layer of that, there's innovation and opportunity for startups.
No, I think you've given a holistic view and it encapsulate the entire ecosystem. So I'll move on to the next one by Dheeraj. He's saying, how do you make your system battery agnostic, considering physical differences in battery and cell specific state of health?
Hey Dheeraj, so we're not battery agnostic, we're cell agnostic, right? So if you look at the battery, there are cells, the thermal management systems, and then BMSs. So those are the three layers. We own the top two. We don't make cells, we buy cells. And fundamentally, every cell, beyond a point, behaves the same. There's a cathode, an anode, there's ions. So there's no much of a difference. Of course, the physical design changes, but for example, in our case, the BMS remains the same. A large part of the thermal management remains the same. The algorithms, if I use the same LFE cell, even if it's a small cell or a large cell, the algorithms fairly remain the same. So we already, for example, rapid charge 8 different types of cells from different suppliers, right? And of course, we're just getting started. So we're now building our catalog to have more and more cells, in some sense, characterized by us. But yeah, that's how we do it.
Great. So I'll move on to the next question by Mahesh. He's talking about the hydrogen part. He's saying with the technological and governmental push for hydrogen-based energy and hydrogen car, and just to add also Nitin Gadkari driving in a hydrogen car, which blew out in the news. Will the EV technology be at the risk of getting obsolete or will it be complementary?
Okay, I mean, I might sound very biased, but I deeply don't believe in hydrogen, right? It's because hydrogen still belongs to the old school way of energy, which is let's burn chemicals, let's transfer chemicals and burn them on your vehicle to get energy, right? If you look at the round trip efficiency of hydrogen, it's actually 33% that of EVs, right? This is from the energy needed to generate hydrogen, then transfer it, and then convert it into electricity using something, either a fuel cell or a turbine on your vehicle, then converted that into a battery, and then from the battery, you need to move to a motor, right? So number of steps that hydrogen involves, it's fairly hard. And I believe like a lot of the petroleum companies need something like hydrogen to work out, right? For you to come and buy something from them already. So hydrogen has obviously got a huge push from that angle. But honestly, why would you want to use hydrogen? There's energy all around. If you can just figure out how to transfer it faster and faster and make it simpler, then there's nothing that can compete with EV, both on weight, on cost, and performance.
But Arun, I have a question just to follow up on this and what you said. So India, what I was reading earlier, that India is planning to produce 5 million tons of green hydrogen by 2030. So how do you not see this as a equal competitor to e-mobility, EVs in particular?
Simply put, it really skews the cost structure of the vehicle and also gets in the way of how efficiently you can design and build vehicles, right? If I were to get into the sort of the weight and the volume that something like a hydrogen turbine needs, it could possibly make sense for really large vehicles, like when I'm talking 20 tonners and above,
Yeah.
right? Then, okay, maybe it's so large that I can afford to put a turbine and then run that to run a battery to then run a motor. It could make sense. Even there, at the end of the day, unit economics matter. So the cost of hydrogen, right, can never be lower than the cost of energy because as I said, there's so many more steps needed to take that energy to convert to hydrogen, then convert it back. So having approaches in multiple angles, the vehicles are better, the energy is cheaper with electricity, and I think that's what will win out.
Fair point. Fair point. Thank you. I'll move on to the next question. We're getting too many, so I'll quickly just try to summarize as many as possible. First question is coming from Rajesh Kulkarni. He's asking, will fast charging increase cell deterioration, thus contributing to thermal runaway?
No, Rajesh, we actually wrote a blog, and I'm going to shamelessly plug that in. You should check it out. In the interest of time, thermal runaway is different. Bad charging leads to thermal runaway, and you could have a thermal runaway when you're doing slow charging as well or fast charging. It's not really dependent on that. How we fast charge is very different. In some sense, if you want to go faster, you need better brakes, right? And the fact that now you have better brakes means you're also safer. So the sort of systems that you need to actually fast charge in the first place, with the sort of accuracy in the BMS, the sort of latency in control loops, just give you safety for free, right? It's not something that we did on purpose, but it's just something you get for free, right? So speed of charging and safety have nothing to do with each other.
Okay. So Mr. Swami is asking, do you focus on wireless charging using the same technology of what you're developing?
Right now, we're focusing very heavily on offloading stuff from the vehicle, right? So this, of course, we are very India's focused right now. We're focusing on vehicles, like if I talk about the sort of vehicles we're working on, right? It's heavily commercial vehicles, right? These are just 10% of the vehicles consume 70% energy, and most of them park on the roads. Even passenger vehicles park on the road, right? Now, the point with wireless charging is it requires a lot of rectifiers and electronics on the vehicle, which significantly change the cost structure of the vehicle, right? And it's something that we love to do, maybe for different markets. But having looked at India and the sort of markets we operate in, we are trying to build the most advanced tech without screwing up economics, right? And balancing that is a daily struggle. So wireless charging is not something we're going to do right now.
Cool, awesome. I have a question though, since you're talking about this. They say that 95% of the times your car is just sitting dormant.
Yeah.
Right? Now, are there actually areas you have to identify where rapid charging is required? Because at most times you don't really require a rapid charger since it's sitting there for a personal consumption.
That's true. But question is, how do you manage charging? Right now, if you have a dedicated parking and charging at home, right, then you can just park and charge at home. And I completely agree with that. That's how US and Europe work when I'm buying a passenger vehicle there, right? But that's not how India works, right? One of our guys actually owns an MG, right, and he lives in Indranagar, which is a fancy part of town in Bangalore, and we pay him decent amount of money, right? But the guy doesn't have parking, right? So once in 3 days, he actually has to go to a public charging location, right, and park and charge, and he does his email. So he's obviously an early adopter, and he sort of worked his life around owning an EV. It doesn't scale to all of India. It doesn't scale to a large market, and it definitely doesn't scale to commercial vehicles who actually don't have that much downtime, right? And as I said, commercial vehicles in India is really the large consumer of energy. It's not passenger vehicles, right? They consume 70% of our on-road energy. So from a point of view of sustainability, from the point of view of moving the needle, you really want to get them going electric. And there's no time to park and charge for 4 hours. And there's also no place, right? Both passenger vehicles, when you park at office, you can't really bring charging to your office. Even if you set up, say, a community charging location, which is the worst idea that everyone comes up with. Let's set up a community charger. But how do you do it? Like, would you actually go park your car and then wait around it for 1 hour, right? And then move your car so someone else can come and do it. Today, we have 30-second attention spans, right? When we go through Instagram stories, no one's got time to do things, right? No one wants to sit and do anything for an hour. And so maybe from a convenience angle, or from an infrastructural angle, or from a cost angle, as I said, faster charging is cheaper. If you were to slow charge, you actually will end up paying more, right? So from all of these angles, you just need rapid charging.
Fair enough. I think I agree now. So I'll move on to another question. Om Rathod has asked 2 questions. Have you observed any dendrite growth formation with this technology? What was the rate of formation? This is one part of it. This second one he's asked is, in both NMC and LFP, what was the difference while fast charging, cycling? Any keynotes for that?
So we've done we've done close to 2,800 cycles of rapid charging, right? And we have not seen any sort of dendrite growth because of that whole Tetris animation thing that I just talked about, right? Because we just don't, today most chargers do something called CCCV charging, which is constant current, constant voltage. That's like the charger saying, "Hey, battery, I don't care about you. Here's my energy, take it." Right? It's like sending the cell to a gym for 90 minutes with no breaks, and that's why dendrites form, especially when you're operating the CV high voltage zone for like half an hour, 1 hour. Right? We don't do that. In 15 minutes, we actually done with the whole operation. We balance the cells and set it back. And if at all the voltage and impedance does build up beyond a point, we stop charging. Right? So in 2,800 cycles, we've seen less than 16% degradation. Right, with every cycle being a rapid charging. So that's definitely not that. As I said, fast charging and dendrite formation have no correlation, right? Yeah. So.
I was actually having a chat with Akshay Singhal the other day, and he was saying that aluminium provides at least anywhere between 45 to 5,000 cycles. So how are you finding that as a competition?
Aluminium Air.
Aluminium lead, I think. Aluminium Air or aluminium lead, one of the two.
I think aluminium Air, if it's log 9, yeah. See, aluminium Air actually makes no sense. Good friends with Akshay and log 9 team. In fact, they're also quite closely involved with what we do. I love the rapid charging they're chasing right now. LTO, advanced cell chemistry, is big fan of what they're doing there. But aluminium air, I think, is something that I'm not sure if they're continuing to focus on that. But of course, the thing with aluminium air is you actually have to, it's not a rechargeable battery, right? You actually have to replace the electrode, which is like going back 20 years. Imagine you had a phone and you had to remove a part of your phone and then throw it away and then get a new part of the phone. It's ancient. I think there are a lot of band-aid solutions, right? And because we haven't taken the time and effort to solve for rapid charging sustainably, right? There's things like battery swap. There's things like aluminium air, which just don't make sense. If you were to look at the cost structure of recycling aluminium and the supply chain involved around recycling aluminium electrodes and making new aluminium air batteries, the cost structures are nowhere close. So,
fair point. Sorry, I think I derailed a bit. So it was just an interesting subject. I thought I'd bring it up. I'll come back to rapid charging now. The question is from Bala Murugan. He's saying, are you not focusing on battery chemistries for rapid charging and increased battery life? Are you focusing only on battery management systems?
Yes, we are cell agnostic, and we work with multiple people building cells. Very interestingly, we are able to rapid charge regular cells like LFP and NMC, and then we have more advanced chemistries like the one Log9 is building, or the one Gigadyne or StoreDot, or a lot of people around the world focusing on new advanced cell chemistries. We rapid charge them in 5 minutes, for example. Right. Of course, these newer cell chemistries are not commercially viable today. So we work with LFP and provide a 15-minute charging solution and a 3,000 cycle life. But both of them will get better. We'll get faster and faster, and batteries will last longer and longer as we continue to have cell innovation. But in my talk, I talked about how just innovating on cells doesn't actually give you faster charging and better life. You still need the rest of the energy stack to manage those energy transactions. Right. And if you were to look at cells as buckets, we're building the pipeline that fills any bucket up very quickly, very precisely, right? So we don't see cells as our problem.
Understood. Move on to the next one quickly. It's by Mahesh Dedia. He's also been a Blue Circle member for very long, so I'll ask his question quickly. He's saying, how does an EV compare with traditional vehicle in contributing to pollution, given the challenges with disposing batteries?
There's actually no environmental issue around disposing batteries. I think that's something that we've inherited as a story from the lead acid days, when you actually had acid and pretty harmful stuff in your battery. Today, an NMC or LFP battery doesn't actually have anything injurious. I mean, like any other waste, disposing waste is an issue, but it's not something that's actually toxic, right? That's my point. Secondly, batteries are lasting longer and longer, right? I think when we started buying phones, they used to last a year, right? And then 3 years became the standard, and 5 years. Today, we're talking 8 years, 9 years. When advanced cell chemistries come, they'll become 15, 20 years. So we're actually, the best way to recycle is not to recycle, right? And in some sense, that's what's happening to batteries. Today, if you look at the energy consumption or generation, Bangalore, for example, already has 50% of energy coming from renewables, and India is just doing a fantastic job on going renewable year on year. Just we're so far ahead of any other country on how quickly we're going renewable. So on both sides, on the cell and the energy side, I think EVs are far more sustainable.
Wow, fantastic. The question is from Dr. Amjad. I'm just going to take 5 minutes of more of your time, then we'll.
Please, I'm flexible. Yeah.
Awesome. So this question is from Dr. Amjad Khan. He's asking, is there a safety risk involved even remotely in rapid charging, like a fire or blast? I'm assuming he's taking this into consideration after the 4 back-to-back fire outbursts which happened.
Okay, so shameless plug, right? So we wrote a blog. I'm just in the interest of time. We just wrote a blog on why do batteries catch fire. Batteries only catch fire because of a short circuit. It's either bad cell quality or bad packaging or bad charging. And it's not about speed of charging, but how you've charged it. So just to prove that out, we actually did a pretty interesting test, right? So we actually overcharged the cell. So this is us overcharging a cell, and you can see a cell bulging up and actually crushing into other cells, right? And we were not fast charging there, right? So we were slow charging, right? So what really kills cell is, do you end up overcharging them, or and how much overcharging do you do, right? This is just one cell, and those are 10 mm aluminum plates, right? And it's just really crushing against them, right? And if you put multiple cells, and this is what's happening inside, right? So if you notice it, like this is dendrite formation. For someone else who also asked this question, this is actually, you can see active dendrite formation on the anode and how it's pushing against the separator, and the cell completely sort of bulges, right? So this is, of course, this video is not by us. We sort of picked it up from LinkedIn, but this is actually a video of our battery being tested. And when you put multiple cells together and test them, you end up actually they actually crush into each other, right? That was just a single cell bulging. Now imagine all of them are bulging, right? There's not enough breathing space. So it inevitably end up having a fire. And this is us actually switching off all our protection systems and overcharging a battery on purpose. That's why you have fires, because you overcharge them. In this particular space, we actually had to overcharge the module all the way to 5 volts. Normally we stop at 3.6 volts, but we had to overcharge to 5 volts to actually cause a fire, right? So that's to give an example of how battery safety is a different problem, and it's an independent problem to battery performance and battery life. These are 3 metrics, and they need to be solved differently. Charge time and safety don't really have a correlation.
Interesting. I'm going to ask one last question. Is by Nishant Patil. He's asking, when is Exponent going to make its technology available to public?
We actually have soft pilots going on. So we have the first few vehicles on road. We've got our first OEM partnership, building up a few more. And I'm not sure what you mean by public, but we do have customers that will now start testing these vehicles on a daily basis. But of course, we are now focused on the commercial vehicle space. So definitely a smaller segment focus, and probably not a consumer product today. But we hope to start working consumer products maybe in a year or so.
Awesome. So thank you very much, Mr. Vinayak. Such an insightful and engaging session. And it was a privilege to hear you. Our guests and I have been hooked on till the very end, and have taken home several nuggets. And thank you to our leaders in the audience for joining us, and for staying till the very end, and for always asking excellent questions.
Hey, thank you so much, Gautam. Thanks for having me. Wonderful
Thank you.
pleasure. It was
Yeah.
total pleasure to be here.
See you soon. I'll see you in Bangalore.
I've seen the best questions in I think in this talk. So I think it really shows the community you're building. So all the best to them.
Thank you. Thank you so much. See you soon.
Thanks, bye.
Bye.